So we are going to talk about Holy Curse, which is a 15-minute short film directed by Snigdha, who is present here, and produced by Neeraj, who is also present here. And Holy Curse is an important short film about conversion therapy that is often imposed upon people from the queer community, and especially for trans people who have to undergo the ordeal of, family people not understanding what they're going through. So, what is it that made you create this film, and when did you come up with the idea, and how did it happen?
Yeah, first of all, just a bit of like background on the themes of the film. It's from the point of view of a gender non-conforming or a non-binary kid. So I'm not specifically labeling their identity, which tends to happen a lot. My intent is to because this film is deeply inspired by my own, upbringing and my experiences of growing up. As someone who didn't conform to the norms of the society. I grew up in Ghaziabad in Uttar Pradesh, which is a very relatively small city, conservative city. So it was mostly inspired by my environment and how I saw patriarchy impacting everyone, especially someone who wouldn't conform to the norms that were laid out by that structure. And in general, in my work and also personally, I like to question structures in society. I'm always interested in subjects and characters that I don't often get to see in the mainstream, especially from the South Asian lens. And because, again, was inspired by an experience that was very much impacted the rest of my life. So I kind of like, I just knew I had to write something around that.
Okay, that's amazing. And actually, since you mentioned Ghaziabad, one thing I also noticed that although the family that is in the film, they are not particularly urban. They seem upper middle class or middle class, but they're not urban. But there's a lot of English conversation that is going on in the film. So was it intentional to portray them as an educated family who like still believe in conversion therapy and you know uh, practices from astrology that encourage these kind of things? So was that intentional?
Very much so. I honestly, I thought like because you were filming in Mumbai, I wanted to have a film, a family that was potentially from the area, but it with the casting and how it just turned out, they were they could be from anywhere, but at the same time, having them speak in English was, I think, intentional because I feel we talk a lot about smaller town people and them having um not enough exposure conversations we have outside of like India or just like at a global stage. And we feel like, oh, they don't know enough, but actually even the educated families, as an example, someone in my family is also a scientist, but they really believe they're very rational, but they also believe in astrology. They would
Hmm.
believe in
Yeah.
going to pundits and you know so that this is such a fairly common thing in our culture, in our community, that we look up to. And a lot of um I would call them quack pundits. They in the name of faith, they misuse and misapply some of the rituals and play on people's vulnerabilities and fears. And then they get them to do certain rituals and make money
Right.
off them. So I think this was more of a universal setting for a family to speak in English, also because Radha, the protagonist in the film, they are an immigrant. And in a way, it was also, I was trying to, in a way, reflect that this person is rejecting the traditionals, which also includes the language, which is why when you see the conversation between Bittu, the cousin, and Radha, he's in a way like, questioning, like, why isn't she speaking? Why isn't my cousin or my
Right.
sister not speaking Hindi, acting too cool? But without understanding what might be going in Radha's mind. But in Radha's mind, I wanted it to portray, the rejection of culture that refuses to understand them. So that was also intentional in how they communicate with the family, and how people like Radha's mother, and even like people when they're trying to impose their, their whatever, call it propaganda, but when anytime they're trying to convince them, they're speaking in English, which is probably, they think, the language you probably understand and relate to the
True.
most.
Understood.
Snigdha, if I may also add, the family, Radha's family actually has come from America. They have moved to America a few years ago, and now they are back here. And while they are in India, they have been pressured by his elder brother to go through this ritual. So there's also this layer that, in some sense, we tend to think that people who migrate to America or UK or any of those Western worlds would be a bit more progressive and perhaps take a better stand. But this also shows the quantity that migrant community gets caught between what exactly to choose and what to stick with and what to move away from. So that was also something interesting I found in this story, and the subtext of the layers that it introduces as a result.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Because I also noticed that, the cousin brother, he keeps telling Radha that, you cannot bring your Western influences here, because whatever you were talking about, not conforming to the, the sex that you were born with, it's kind of a Western concept. So yeah, that makes the point even more clear. Yeah, thank you, Neeraj. So actually, now coming to Neeraj, I know you have produced some other beautiful queer-centric films as well, like Sheer Qorma, and which I have not watched yet, but I watched another film called My Mother's Girlfriend. I think it was on movie. It was directed by Arun Fulara. I'm also in touch with him on Instagram. So, and I think there was another movie called Evening Shadows, which I watched long ago. Uh, Evening Shadows was also about a gay man, I think, and his relationship with his mother. Uh, I watched it like 2019 or something. So, as a producer, what do you think are the main challenges that LGBTQ filmmakers or producers or distributors face in a country like India, which is still kind of, struggling between being accepting of all these kind of so-called new concepts that are coming at it in a society that is trying to evolve at every moment, but is also very conservative, because even if you go and watch these films with your friends, you'll probably not be very open about it with your parents. There have been many commercial attempts, obviously, like one of the recent films that I really liked was Badhai Do, which was really well made as a mainstream film in this area. So, what do you think are the challenges producers or filmmakers face in this area, and how do you think you can overcome them with the help from the audience also, in a way?
Sure. So my journey started as a producer primarily to give LGBTQ filmmakers or people who had a point of view about LGBTQ stories a platform to tell their stories. So basically, the journey started with understanding the challenges that people face, all the way from financing these films to to bringing cast and crew, to getting the films done, and then to exhibit and distribute, and so on and so forth. So understanding this challenges at every stage is something that we look to work with filmmakers in their journey. So primarily, not being able to people, there are generally producers out there who don't know what to do with the story and who's going to watch it and so on, and it becomes a bit of a catch-22 situation. If you don't produce the content, people will not watch it, and people won't watch it, then you don't know that there's an audience for it.
True.
So somebody had to make change. So that's why we started working on primarily on LGBTQ stories. At the same time, working wherever possible, working with LGBTQ filmmakers, cast and crew, and so on and so forth, to create an ecosystem where LGBTQ stories could thrive. And once those stories were out there and they started going to festivals, then they started finding audiences, such on various mediums, be it OTT platforms, be it omni video channels such as YouTube, or even corporate screenings. And many of these films have been able to make their impact in various places. So to recap your question, it's an entire ecosystem. Which has quite a bit of challenges, but we are here to bridge through that, to see that these stories do get voiced and seen.
Yeah, yeah. I think that is very important. And speaking of ecosystem, how important do you think representation is in terms of, people not just behind the camera, like writers and directors being involved, or even representation in terms of actors, trans actors playing trans characters or something like that, because that really hasn't been implemented so much in India as far as I understand. It's happening, but it's taking its time. For example, there is this brilliant Pakistani film called Joyland, which actually has a trans actor playing a trans character. But if you look at mainstream Hindi cinema, there was a film that called Chandigarh Kare Ashiki that came away a couple of years ago, in which it was a cis actress playing the trans character. So how important do you think it is to incorporate these representations, or is it okay to, kind of compromise on these because of the talent that can be brought in? Or what is your opinion on this?
Sure. Here we have to make a distinction between the gender spectrum and the sexuality spectrum. So gender spectrum
Right.
is where people identify differently from the assigned gender at birth. So this is where non-binary individuals, trans individuals come in. Their stories are much more nuanced. The experiences are a lot more layered and so on. So to bring those stories to life are best done through people who have gone through those experiences. So we believe that trans roles for trans actors is the need of the hour. I've personally worked with many trans actors, both trans men and trans women, of all age groups, and also trans men and trans women filmmakers too. So when you give people chances, only see the best out of them emerge. You will see that the nuances of the stories emerge, and that's how the ecosystem will get generated. If you are not if you try to find an easy way out of bringing in a cis actor to play a trans actor, or worse, if you think that playing a trans role is an acting conquest that one must do to prove themselves that they are an amazing actor, this is a completely wrong notion. It is not your role to play. It belongs to someone who has actually gone through that experience to be able to portray it with that authenticity. So my suggestion would be that if a cis character is offered a trans role, and especially where the transition is not happening, we don't see them in trans and cis roles. Especially in those kind of roles, we should encourage trans people to step in. Training trans people to at every stage, for instance, training them to act, training them to be behind the camera, training them to write, to direct, is the need of the hour. Only then we can bring in that level of sensitivity in front and behind the camera, and that's how we can tell an authentic stories and have a proper representation in front of camera.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we have emerged from using such characters as comic relief, which used to happen even in the 90s and early 2000s to now, but there is still a long way to go, and that could only happen with active participation from people who have genuinely undergone those experiences in life. So I totally agree with what you're saying.
Plus,
yeah, if I can add that, no, I feel a lot of times what ends up happening is in the context of the mainstream, the filmmakers and the producing team, they justify decisions of having a non-representation of a character from the community that they're trying to talk about. The justification is commerce, because they want to bring in more people to the audience.
Known
How do you sell
faces
tickets? So that's right. Yeah, so it becomes a vicious cycle that nobody wants to jump. I sometimes feel it's an easy excuse. We have seen a lot of trans actors who have been doing some fabulous job I think Made in Heaven is one of them. Love, Sex, Dhoka. 2, I saw a character. I think an intent to actually involve people from their lived experiences and represent them on screen. So I think if it's an easy excuse, one needs to look at how they are making those decisions. I guess, yeah, I mean, it's a deeper conversation to be had within the ecosystem of, the film industry.
Yeah, definitely. I think Neeraj also wanted to add something.
I would like to add that you said that these things are coming from outside. They are not necessarily coming from the concept of gender, and the gender identity is not necessarily coming from outside. It's people who are getting educated. The society is moving really fast, but the visual representation is not keeping up with it. So that is the reason why we are seeing this dichotomy. And that's the reason why we need appropriate representation, adequate representation, stories showing that gender is not a binary construct, and there are identities which can lie in on the spectrum and so on. And Holy Curse does a really good job questioning those constructs and questioning how society reacts to when presented with these identities. So Snigdha, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a very critical point, because when we were showing the film in the feedback stage, a lot of different people responded to the film differently, and they had their own interpretation of who this person is. And that's like, I think, the beauty of making a film where we are representing a point of view from a personal experience, but then when you give it to people to watch, they'll have their own interpretations based on their own experiences. So a lot of people thought Radha is trans. A lot of people would think Radha is non-binary, or they wouldn't even think about gender. They'd think probably this character is dealing with sexuality. So there's this lack of understanding of the difference between sexuality and gender that also kind of got highlighted in that process. And I think, as Neeraj pointed out, as a society, we are so quick to pick labels for people. And like sometimes we just don't give them the opportunity to express and figure it out, especially at that young age where people don't know who they are, which is the experience I was coming from, where I didn't know who I was. Like, I didn't have the vocabulary growing up in the 90s in India. We didn't have the tools that we have today. And then when I moved to US, I had all these labels, and I'm trying to like figure out where do I fit in. I'm still trying to find like labels that I could best fit in, but I did not. It's also how the West looks at queerness, and the kind of differences in Eastern and Western philosophy of looking at the concept of self. So it's interesting. I mean, it's just something that we are learning as we are sharing the film and hearing from people and how they're responding to it.
Yeah, that's very important. And like you said, these reactions of people where they couldn't quite figure out how does Radha identify themselves. I think it's also hinting at the fact that the spectrum is very vast. Like every person might be going through, they must be questioning that where do I fit in. So that is what the film tries to convey, and that also at an impressionable age that Radha is in. So that is the point when people really start to question these things about themselves, and it could be that they cannot figure out till they're much older, which is also completely okay. I mean, it's a lifelong process of figuring yourself out. So when you talk about conversion therapy and the negative impacts of it, obviously there are no positive impacts. But so how did you look at that particular angle? How did you do some background research about it? Like, what are the practices you came across, and how did you pick one particular practice to go with in the film?
Yeah, when I began writing, my goal was just to write a story that was inspired by my own upbringing. But there was this personal experience while I was visiting India, which made me realize, again, how astrology was being used. And I would say misused and in the context of like, if someone doesn't conform to the norms, then there is something wrong with them and they need to be cured. by divine intervention. So a lot of these, again, I wouldn't want to name certain practices, but I got fascinated by the space of astrology and rituals, and I didn't want to name any ritual, but you can even guess when you watch the film. These are like very common practices and rituals that we see every day in our lives. But I didn't want to name them because, in my perspective, it's not the ritual itself that is the issue, but the misapplication and misuse of
the intention
these
behind
practices,
it, obviously,
and the intention due to lack of understanding of the deeper challenge someone is experiencing, and they fit their own narrative. For example, in my personal experience, someone they questioned my womanhood and suggested remedies to align my stars by doing a 1-week-long expensive puja. Just because in their opinion, I was not conforming to the idea of what a woman should be, or what idealized femininity is. And that was, I laughed at that, and the interesting thing is, even if my family would oppose what they're saying, nobody would want to offend the higher power. So they'd be like, what's the worst that can happen? It's positive energy. Let's just do this.
Yeah.
It's great. Let's just do it. So, these things, when I wrote the film, I remember I shared it like the very first draft with Dheeraj, and he pointed out, I'm so glad you are addressing the subject of conversion therapy. And for a second, I was like, conversion therapy? Oh my God, yes. Like you don't even think about it. You're thinking of it as astrology. That's so integral to our culture. But actually is it's very much an unacknowledged form of conversion therapy. And because it's not institutionalized in India,
exactly,
as and like in many other countries, you can't easily point out that this is conversion therapy per se, but this is what ends up happening and how it can impact people is it's I can't imagine. Like, I know my experience, which was in a very different context, but someone who goes through what Radha is going through, it's deeply traumatizing. And I think it was important to reflect that on screen. And yeah, I hope people sensitively approach the subject when they when they watch the film, but also after they watch the film, it's a moment to reflect on what happens when they go to people and blindly follow what these people tell them.
Yeah, but this is true. You are showing. Yeah, I'm sorry. Please continue.
Shall if I might add, the other thing is that when the trauma that's induced on us when these therapies or when these rituals are administered, as if you're wrong, and these rituals are here to correct you, and the trauma that it induces, it's a double trauma. One is you're trying to identify yourselves, figure out yourselves, and rather than getting the proper counseling and a safe space, you're now being told that it's your fault somehow, and you're through all these rituals, which are at times quite scary. Because these are very different from the conventional pujas that happen. So it's doubly traumatic, and deep down what impact it creates and how it will manifest itself in your future life is unknown. So it's just that's also a part which I found quite important about this story and the way it was told.
Yeah, true. Because you understand, it's not a usual puja, because there is this thing of this the male doll, and then they're saying that it's because a male spirit is not at peace, so you have to do all these things, and that spirit is trying to manifest himself through your body and stuff like that, which is kind of crazy. But I think it's even more unfortunate when you go to medical professionals who are also involved in this kind of stuff. Like they will tell you, we will treat you in some way. There are horrible things like electrocution and all these things, which a lot of medical professionals and psychiatrists in different parts of the country still do, whether it's legal or not, to convert somebody to something else, which is horrible to see the least. But it's great that I'm sure people will have some kind of reflection after watching this film, and you know think that this is not the way to approach people who are going through something like this. They need a safe space to open up and talk about it in a more nuanced and obviously scientific manner, because this it is obviously scientific, and there's no way you can counter it with something which is non-scientific or pseudo-scientific. So because you are based outside India, Snigdha, so I wanted to ask, what do you think, like having probably talked to Indian filmmaker colleagues or other people, like do you think independent films have a better acceptance or better chance at getting, recognized outside India? Or like, because India still has a divide between what is independent, what is mainstream, what is commercial, and what is, so to say, art house. It still exists. The lines are getting blurred, but it still exists. So, what is your experience as somebody who is working from outside the country? Is it more beneficial in some way?
Honestly, I'm still learning, because this is I was working as a cinematographer for 7 years, making mostly films in the US, and I transitioned to writing and directing in the last 4 years. So while I tried to make my first film in the US with a very specific American lens, again, but from a South Asian perspective of a brown queer birth mother. So I did that, but I didn't feel very connected to the stories I could tell here. There are other Indian Americans or like Indian immigrant filmmakers who are telling those stories, but I just felt I gravitated towards the stories from India. So I'm figuring out the landscape still, but I feel like for me, I want to bridge that gap where I can bring in those nuanced, deeper stories from our diaspora to the mainstream for a global audience. And there's definitely, if you are clear about what it is that you want to say and you can present it, you stand by it, and figure out a way to make it entertaining and accessible enough for people to understand that context. I think it opens up a lot of doors. The fact that the film is playing at London Film Festival, I think that was a solid example, because we didn't know anyone at that festival. It's not like, just someone reached out to us. We just like submitted the film to the festival, and something connected with them. And we are talking about universal issues. And I feel, I think there is a shift even within the Indian audiences in the kind of content they want to see and the kind of content they appreciate. So there is that shift, but I can't speak of the commerce or the commercial aspect of the business. I think Neeraj might be able to add more on those lines, because he's been involved in that aspect for a few years now, with a feature as well.
Yeah.
Sure. So the thing is, while the distinction is sort of fading and people are beginning to consume different kinds of media, different kinds of foreign films and so on and so forth, so the distinction is fading. But somehow the distribution models, the conventional distribution model, the theatrical distribution models are still quite archaic, and they're not prone to that much of experimentation. So in the absence of that experimentation, it becomes really difficult for us to prove. Again, it's a catch-22, right? If you're not able to distribute, how do you know that audience wants it? And if you don't know there's an audience, you're never going to distribute it. So it's something that has to be done systemically, through government's help, or through help of big studios who sort of make room for independent voices, independent stories. That would be exciting. I mean, in America, there are theaters, or the chains of theaters that distribute independent cinema, and they have loyal fans to go and consume that cinema. Creating that kind of distribution mechanism in India should be that difficult, especially in tier 1 and tier 2 cities. And that not just it's not just a case for independent cinema, but genre cinemas as well. I mean, there is a huge audience for horror, and there's a huge audience for sci-fi, and so on and so forth. But they sort of largely remain hidden unless these stories come out as through big studios, and because they have a different model of pushing these stories out. So systemically, there's a lot more that can be done, because all in all, it's going to just enrich our ecosystem. We're going to see some amazing stories, some amazing storytellers come out of it, and it's going to be great. Plurality in storytelling is always exciting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but so do you think Indian independent filmmakers are taking enough risks now to, talk about stories that really need to be heard, but are also bold in some way, like because we work specifically in the LGBTQ ecosystem. So, what would your advice to aspiring filmmakers be who really want to take these risks but are not feeling that brave about it as to how the audience will receive their films?
So let me just address this step by step by step. Independent filmmakers have always been taking risks
That's
for
true.
generations and generations. They are the ones who have always taken risks about bringing subjects which we don't hear of, and presenting them in a way, in an imaginative way, or in a intensely thought-provoking way. Their efforts have been largely lauded all over the world, including the big festivals.
Yeah.
But somehow there is a certain level of distinction that is being done in the distribution space, and it's the people who govern the distribution space, the people who govern this uh, the choice of films for Oscars or uh, is are largely they come from a different generation. So we see that generational thing where the younger generation is much more open to a certain level of stories, but the old guard sort of always wants to distribute a certain thing, or always wants to stick to a certain level of certain models and so on. And I'm hoping that will change. So in terms of risk taking, that's always been there. Now, in terms of people taking risks, or LGBTQ cinema, in terms of taking risks in terms of LGBT cinema, you just need to find the right team members, right producers who will give you that freedom to lean into that space, to tell that story without compromising.
True.
It's not without its own challenges, because we don't have infinite source of money. At some point, we really need to make this project commercially viable. But if you have a good producer, if you have a good team, you will still understand how to make a subject, how to make a project, a film, thought-provoking, at the same time entertaining. And entertaining is the name of this business. If you're able to entertain people at the same time, make them think, or encourage them to think, you have cracked it. So finding the right package, finding the right team is the way to go, is what my suggestion is.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I just have one last question for Snigdha, which I just framed up right now because you told me you worked in cinematography for many years, right? So I actually made a post a while ago, as per my observation, that many cinematographers, when they make films as directors or like even first-time directors, they do it with children. I don't know, I have observed something
Oh,
like
really?
this. Yes. And
That's
so
so
it
funny.
came to my mind recently. There was a short film called Anardana, which got
Oh,
premiered in Berlinale, and the filmmaker of that film, Nishi, she's a cinematographer who studied from FTII, and she made this film with a 5-year-old girl about the girl, dealing with the death of her grandmother while not understanding the concept of death. So that was also from her own personal experience. But I have also noticed in other cases there are many cinematographers who have worked with children due to some reason, and I feel it's something to do with how you like to have a lot of activity in your frame. Maybe that's why. So I don't know. I'm just curious. Have you ever thought about this, or was it did you really want to do something with a child, as in, pre-adolescent child in some way? Was it conscious decision, or you wanted to make something about gender identity? That's fine, but you could have also done it with an adult, right? So was
yeah.
it something to do with your cinematographer brain, or just a question that popped up right now in my mind?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I've not noticed this, but I guess now I'm gonna now just search if that's a
Yeah,
thing.
I will send you the
But
post later on.
yeah, I'm interested to see how many other people have done that. But I feel for me, I guess like cinematographers love to work with the unknowns and the unpredictability which children offer, but they're also the most innocent, most authentic. You can't train them. You can't ask them to perform a certain way. So you have to kind of like shed your inhibitions and just go with the flow. And I even though I was working as a cinematographer, I always wanted to direct. I was doing documentaries in India, and I was interested in exploring the space of like working with subjects, but in a fiction format.
Yeah.
So for me, I feel like with kids, it's just always a lot of fun because again, like they're not working on the project as a professional, but as just themselves, and that just brings a certain ease for everyone else on the team as well. So a lot of actors who are like such beautifully like seasoned actors, they come on set, and they probably have a process, and then you put the kid in the frame and all that process just disappears, and it just has to be based on what the child is doing, and they have to respond to that. And most good actors, they respond to the actor who is in front of them, and
Yeah.
kids kind of like push you to do that. So I think I just love the whole unknown, innocent aspect of working with children. It's also the most, like you mentioned, it's an impressionable age. And I feel kids don't know, they're still like figuring out the world, so it just makes for some great texture of a character, where you don't have a lot of narratives in your head. You're still forming those thoughts, so it's an interesting stage to play with.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea I had in mind. Also, that the unpredictability that you talked about, which make things more interesting because you don't really know what is going to happen on screen unless you watch it and then you decide what to keep and what not to keep. So it's not
Yeah.
completely scripted, which is the case with adults most of the time, unless they improvise
Right.
from their side. With children, I think there's a lot of improvisation by default. So
Oh yeah.
yeah.
I mean, in both my shorts, I work with children. I'll just give you quick examples. In the first one, this kid was 7-year-old, and he got sick on the first day of the shoot, but he was a trooper. Like I didn't get to know that he was unwell. But he still came on set, and his energy was somehow, it worked. Like being sick, it somehow worked for the scene, but it was just, I couldn't tell him, despite me telling him multiple times, why don't you look at this other character, like she's acting with you, but he wouldn't look at her for some reason. So I had to sit next to him and make him do the entire scene speaking to me, and then I would just prompt him once, now you look there. So it worked out, but it's so difficult to direct them. And with the second shot with Mrunal, who plays Radha, she didn't know how to scream. She's like, I don't scream in real life. And how do I scream? So even if she would scream or try to like do something of that sort, it wouldn't come out authentically, and it was just not what it was, just over dramatic, or just didn't feel
Yeah.
right. And so I think Aditi, who plays her mom, Radha's mom in the film, she's somehow she has this phobia with lizards, and she's like, imagine you have a lizard in your lap, and she's like, oh, that I get. I
Yeah,
hate
yeah, yeah.
lizards. So then she came that way. So it's this finding these new ways to work with them, and it's just always so much fun to do that on set, instead of like coming with preconceived notions of how the set should be and how to be with every actor. So yeah.
Okay, understood. I mean, fun and challenging at the same time, but also here the filmmaker has to bring in some improvisations of their own to make things
Yeah,
happen. So yeah, that sounds very
absolutely.
interesting. Okay, so that's all the questions I had to ask. If you want to add anything from your side, please go ahead and do. And I would also like to tell everyone. So there are two festivals coming up where Holy Curse is going to screen. So there's BFI London and there's Tasveer, which is the uh, festival that is the only festival that
It's a
qualifies for the Oscars, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
only also qualifying South Asian Film Festival,
Hmm.
Outside
and
India.
Outside
outside
India.
of India.
Okay. Yeah, congratulations for that. It's very well deserved, obviously. And I was very happy to watch the film. And please add something from your side, whatever you want.
Snigdha, how about you add the fact about the all-woman crew and how the film was made, which was quite unique in itself. So maybe you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, since I spoke about working as a cinematographer, there were a lot of, environments where we found ourselves to be the only woman, and sometimes, there were these undertones of sexism on set, right? So once I decided I wanted to transition to writing and directing, it just gives you the agency to pick the team that you want to work with, and you figure out the culture you want to develop when you're working on your set. So with that in mind, when in India, I realized there was a lot of hierarchy, not just sexism, but there was casteism. There's like hierarchy, very different way of working from my experience of working in US. So I think between me, Juhi, and one of our other producer, Shweta, we really wanted to encourage a lot of women in the key departments. So our whether it was the production team, whether it was cinematography, Juhi's entire team, except maybe one person, were or women. And I think it was important for us to give more opportunities, which it becomes a catch-22 kind of situation where people don't hire women because they've not seen enough work, or they feel they don't have enough experience, but they don't have enough experience because they have not been given those opportunities. So while it was, we had a lot of, people who were not as experienced, we knew we were entering with that limitation. So we prepared, we couldn't prepare everything, but we had that challenge. But at the same time, we were open to allowing that space to fail, which generally doesn't happen. And we did fail at multiple places, but that failure was also an opportunity for us to come together and figure out solutions. And it was, I think, one of the best sets to be a part of. It was so collaborative. There were no judgments, no screaming or shouting. And it was, I think, we just had a fantastic time working together.
Amazing. That's very good to hear. Neeraj, you have something to add?
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
No, it's my pleasure. Yeah. Absolutely. I am really honored that I got to watch the film, and I hope whenever it is premiered for people in India, everyone gets to watch it as well, and I'm sure they will appreciate and recommend to their friends and family. Yeah.
There is one more thing, which is you might see this interview at any point in time when the film is wherever in its journey. You might stumble upon this film on one of the OTT platforms or in one of the film festivals. We encourage that you go to the IMDb page for our film and rate us and leave us a review and rate us, because that is the best way for us to know what you thought about the film. And certainly a really amazing way to encourage the cast and crew to keep on making some amazing work going forward. So that's something that I would like to add.
Yeah, that's great. And I think social media is very vocal nowadays. So if the word spreads, it does spread. So hoping the best for that as well. Yeah.